Demo, not for broadcast. Property of WABC New York.
The best time to prepare is now. Whether it's a new virus, supply chain shortages, or new government regulations, having essential medications on hand means you're ready for anything. At All Family Pharmacy, it's easy to stock up on ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, mebendazole, antibiotics, or more. No insurance, no red tape, just fast, reliable access to the medications you and your family need. Here's how it works. Order online. A licensed doctor provides your prescription, and your medication ships straight to your door. Quick, easy, and hassle-free. Don't wait for the next crisis to hit or until you're already sick. Prepare now and take control of your health. Go to allfamilypharmacy.com/golden and use code GOLDEN10 for 10% off your order. That's allfamilypharmacy.com/golden, because being prepared is always the best plan.
It's the left versus the right. In the right corner,
It's James Flippin.
in the left corner, it's Governor David Paterson. Live from Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate.
All right, it's Saturday afternoon. You know what that means. It's time for the left versus the right. And I'm James Flippin here on 77 WABC, representing the right wing of political theory and thought here in the United States of America. And opposite me right now, former New York Governor David Paterson, well known to these airwaves, a frequent contributor, a frequent co-host on Katz and Cosby. So Governor Paterson, representing the political left, we're going to have a little spirited discussion here, try to find some areas where we both agree and disagree on the various topics that we've laid out. So Governor Paterson, good to have you back here, and fun to kind of renew our friendly hostilities, I guess you would say,
yes,
right?
I thought we did very well last week. Nobody got hurt. No one got shot.
That's exactly right. That's always a good thing. Anytime you get into the realm of politics, you got to be aware of that type of stuff. So let's do it first and foremost, right off the rip. We found out yesterday that Judge Dale Ho of the federal court system here in Manhattan has basically said he's going to indefinitely suspend the trial that Mayor Eric Adams would have faced, or potentially, I guess, still could, regarding alleged crimes of bribery, corruption, and the Trump White House has pushed to dismiss those charges. Kind of still an ongoing thing. Governor Kathy Hochul has said that she's not going to remove Adams from office, although she has the power to do so. Looks like she's going to put some sort of babysitter on him or try to do that with a deputy inspector. So at this point, I know, generally speaking, that you are of the mindset that Adams, whatever it was he did or didn't do, and of course we're not going to adjudicate that in court, it looks like, you don't think it was anything that was actually a justified standard of prosecution. Is that the right way to say it? Like, in other words, you feel as though those charges never really should have been brought against Adams in the first place. Is that fair to say?
Well, actually, when the charges were first brought, and you know, in this business and in the media, you have friends, you're close to people, but you never know exactly what's going on with them. And so I didn't really have any opinion. You know, sometimes somebody gets indicted, a lot of people like them. He couldn't have done that. He couldn't have done that. Or you see it on Law and Order.
I've known him a long time.
Yeah, I've known him a long time. He's not like that. But I didn't really have that point of view. What I did feel was that when the Justice Department came back and dropped the charges and then put the phrase "without prejudice" in, that it just scrambled up the whole situation, because now, in a sense, that was the first babysitter that Mayor Adams got.
That's fair.
That they could monitor him.
Right. And
I would say that's what bothered me, is then at that point, other people, politicians around the city, got together to have a meeting about what they should do about him. And I'm not talking about Governor Hochul. I'm talking about some of the other politicians. And listen, the thing is, you could be the person that gets in trouble tomorrow. So I didn't think that they needed to pass judgment that way. And then some of the reasons they gave for why he should leave, one by the controller, Brad Lander, who said there could be a big snowstorm and he wouldn't know what to do. So what would the city do? I know what the city would do. The sanitation commissioner would take care of the snow. Yeah. The transportation commissioner would take care of the making the trains run. And I think and it's just an exercise in futility for me.
Well, I think that the point you make as far as like a Brad Lander and whatever, he's got to say about the mayoral race and his political prospects and trying to get into the campaigning aspect of things, certainly nothing that's going to impress me or cut any ice with me. And that's a pretty weak potential justification for Adams having to step down is the possibility of a snowstorm. I would agree with you on that. But I think there's something about this Adams situation. There's a few things, if I'm being honest with you, that just don't sit right with me. One, and I'll just start at this level because I think it's a little more academic, a little more theoretical, and I'm curious to get your take on it. It sort of feels like there's this idea that campaign finance violations or potentially manipulating straw donors is not really that big of a deal. And I'm kind of almost willing to roll with that. In other words, politics is a messy business. The money of it's very complicated, all this kind of stuff. If it wasn't for the matching taxpayer funds, the fact that you can have these straw donor things come through and then also get matching public financing that's from hard-earned taxpayer dollars, it doesn't sit right with me that then you're making funny money with that whole system. Essentially, you're stealing from the city when you do that. So I do think that there's not enough being said about it's actually a legitimate crime that should be looked at, punished, prosecuted, whatever, if in fact it happened. Do you think it's fair to say that some people are sort of saying, well, it's campaign finance, it's messy? Is it fair that I'm looking at it that way?
Well, James, you don't mind if I'm totally blunt?
Not at all.
You'll have to find something else to argue with me about. I agree with everything you just said.
Okay, that's good. That's good. And I think that's interesting. Now, what about this one? I don't really necessarily recall, and you and I, as people who spend time in New York and closely watch the New York political scene, are potentially more qualified to speak to this than somebody like a President Trump, for example, or some of the people in his inner circle, because they're not in New York City as much these days. They're Mar-a-Lago, they're Washington, D.C., they're on the national scene. It kind of makes me pull my hair out, if I'm being honest with you, whatever hair I have left, when I hear that Mayor Adams was some really strong force against the Biden White House in terms of immigration. That just didn't happen. There was never a point in time where Adams really started to go to a war aggressively with the concept of sanctuary city, with securing the border by word of executive order, suggesting that there's something wrong with the way Democrats look at immigration. None of that. And I gave City Hall the chance to say, look, Fabian Levy's of the world and stuff like that. Tell me that Adams is giving up on sanctuary city. I'd love to report that. It never came. Then the financing wasn't there for New York City to be able to deal with the influx of migrants. That's when I feel like you heard Adams cry foul, and much like Andrew Cuomo during the COVID pandemic saying, well, we're going to need some money for this.
Well, I think that Adams wasn't happy about some of the things that were going on. But I think that when President Trump saw him at the Alfred E. Smith dinner, I think this is a moment that will be remembered a long time in politics. Trump went right up to him and said, listen, the stuff they're doing to you, it's minor next to what they're doing to me. But I do think it's unfair. So at that point, I think Adams, seized on the opportunity that he might get help from a source he wasn't expecting, and then got a little stronger on those issues. I would say, yes, he responded to an advantageous position for him politically.
But is it fair, and this is the left versus the right, if you're just joining us, we have this discussion every week here, Saturday afternoons from 3 to 4, or I should say 4 to 5, in which we're able to kind of expand on some of these political issues, local, national, from a left versus right perspective. I'm James Flippin on the right, and he's former Governor David Paterson on the left. Is it fair to say that the quid pro quo allegation sort of potentially has some legs to it? Because like you said, you didn't like the fact that the charges were dismissed without prejudice. The Kathy Hochul ability to fire him, the ongoing question of whether or not Alvin Bragg on the state level could bring charges against Adams. He's sort of being pulled in all different directions here by people who kind of have him by the short ones, for lack of a better phrase. And he's kind of got to do what his various marching orders say, right? I mean, isn't that by definition kind of a quid pro quo?
I think so. In other words, I don't think that the White House ever said that or felt that way. I don't think Adams said that. I don't know how he felt after that. I think what aroused the criticism from his colleagues was the incident on Fox and Friends with Tom Holman.
Yeah.
that just didn't look good at all.
It definitely did not.
But I've had bad days too, so I'll move on and just say that this...
Well, who was it in that moment that had a bad day? Was it Holman being too much of a tough guy and making Adams look bad? Or was it Adams sort of not necessarily knowing the best way to navigate that situation from a images perspective?
I thought Holman, while some of it was a little vulgar, I thought he was saying that it better cooperate or we're going to deal with him. But Adams was silent. And I think I think you and I were talking off, Mike, I guess it was last week, and I said to you, reminded me of the time that Mike Tyson and his wife, Robin Givens, went on that ABC interview show, and she trashed him for an hour, and he just sat there, steaming, but didn't say anything.
Right.
As soon as they got outside, he chased her out of the parking lot, and then when she tried to come back home, he chased her off the premises.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, it was very awkward, and it is kind of one of those things where I feel as though it's hard for me to watch sometimes because I think Adams is a guy who obviously has a lot of accomplishments on his ledger, and he made it all the way from being a cop to being the mayor of the city, and that's obviously very impressive in its own way. But you could tell that he's kind of a wounded ego to an extent at this point. The way he's lashing out and going to some of his allies and some of these churches and, kind of rising up with the tone and tenor of like a preacher or something like that and saying, I shall not be defeated and all this. And the way that he kind of just in that moment with Holman said, well, I'm looking for ICE to do what they need to do too. Like he was kind of trying to push back, and I don't know, it's very awkward to have the guy who's leading New York City in such a compromised position. I don't really know what is supposed to happen from here for him, for Hochul. I mean, if you were in Hochul's shoes, what do you think you would do right now? Well,
Hochul has made a pretty good case not to remove him. That, in other words,
because she said the will of the voters have spoken.
The voters will have spoken. That's what I thought she would do.
When would you ever look to remove a? I mean, should the New York governor even have the ability to do that?
Well, suppose you had a situation where there was a domestic violence incident and some family member of the mayor was badly hurt and went to a hospital or something like that. Mm-hmm. You might remove a mayor over that. You can't be mayor and be engaging in those types of situations, and
that would rise to a different standard for you than
for
something
me. That would rise
that would
to
be untoward regarding
to
campaign
standard,
finance or
even though, like for instance, people commit crimes, the police come and arrest them. It's not clear whether the person's guilty or not under the law, but the arrest is necessary to get them to the law. Mm. So that's what I think would be the case. In other words, it is a privilege to be mayor of the city of New York or governor of the state of New York, and I think that there has to be some decorum that surrounds that. I don't think anything Adams has done. Now, about the speeches that he makes, it seems to be an area of comfort for him.
Right.
In a place where he's going to yell and the audience is going to yell back.
Yes.
And we have thousands of elected officials on both sides of the aisle who like to go to these places and hear the cheers for themselves.
Yeah, go to the home turf and kind of get the crowd reaction.
Now, what I'll say, James, I'm going to give you a credit on this one.
Okay.
Is I don't know, it may be working in those venues, but I don't know if it's working around the city for him, because when people look for leadership, they're really looking to feel safe, like someone that's going to make you feel safe. I'm going to drive every migrant out of this country. I don't know if the person really can do it, but I sure like hearing that. Like it's that kind of thing.
The confident tone, the tone that's sort of like definitively saying, this is what I'm going to do for you.
And Mayor Adams, who is a confident person, gives the impression sometimes that he isn't when he has these.
Yeah, I mean, and look, I do think that and this is where I think as the official member of the right on this show, I can sort of flex political and spike the football down. I don't know how anybody on the Democratic side right now could feel confident, because any particular position that you might feel worthwhile taking, whether it's efficient government spending or enforcing the current immigration statutes or actually locking up people who are violent criminals, those are very unpopular policies with the sort of super far left wing of the Democratic Party. And that's the power center of the party right now. So would it be fair to say, Governor Paterson, kind of given what you're saying, from a political analyst, consultant, politician yourself, place of standing and footing, is Adams kind of toast as a politician at this point? I mean, do you give him what kind of chance do you give him in the November election at this point?
Before we even assume that, we have to get him through the primary.
That's true. A very crowded primary, by the way.
Very crowded primary. And
does that work to his favor, by the way, with the ranked choice voting and just the fact that he's obviously an incumbent and has a major name recognition, and some people might not even really know that much about the charges or whatever?
Yeah, I think the ranked choice voting would help him, but he's up against some pretty stiff competition. Other than these moments where he seems to lose himself. Brad Lanner has served the city well as a controller. Mm-hmm. Scott Stringer served the city very well as a controller for 2 terms. And Andrew Cuomo is thinking about coming back and running again. He would be formidable, and he's ahead in the polls. And he, like myself, came into office and had to go through a major crisis, and that was the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I had to go through the Great Recession of 2008 and pulled it together and pulled the state together. So you got to recognize that Adams is up against some stiff competition.
Do you think that Cuomo, having had some of that baggage sort of towards the end of his time as governor, with the women coming forward and whatever that was, and then the anger over the nursing home order, and even like the book that he wrote about the time during COVID, but maybe some of his staffers allegedly helped him write it and stuff like that. Is any of that baggage still a risk for him at this point, or has the electorate moved on past that?
I don't think the book is a baggage for him. I do think that, for instance, one of the women dropped her case against him. It was Charlotte Bennett. Mm-hmm. She dropped the case. If that was me, I would have said, well, I'm very happy she dropped the case. Maybe she realizes now that I wasn't trying to hit on her. You say something like that.
Right.
The Cuomo team can't do that. They started trashing her. She dropped the case. And I know they're going to call me up and say I shouldn't say that they trashed her. Mm-hmm. I'll bet she thinks they trashed her. I'll bet a lot of women that when he's campaigning and he's confronted with it are going to say that. Sometimes you have to learn that you're not always right, and sometimes you have to accept that you're wrong.
And not everybody can be Donald Trump, right? I mean, the whole the rule of the playbook for Trump, it seems like, is never really apologize, never really back down, maintain that stiff upper lip, and just kind of plow through it all. But I don't know if Andrew Cuomo can really play that game as well as.
Well, James, that is very interesting what you said. I didn't think anyone on the right could say something interesting, but you just did. No, I'm kidding. But
it's the left versus the right, baby.
Honestly, I think that Trump has this almost mystical ability to read an audience and read people. And I think he knows when to turn it on, and he knows when to turn it on so much that you think he went too far, but then the people who care about him stick up for him.
Right.
Where with former Governor Cuomo, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that kind of support.
You know what he does have going for him, though? You mentioned just the term turn on the pressure or whatever. Cuomo, women love this guy. I mean, women, we saw it during the pandemic, the Cuomo sexuals. I personally don't see it. I'll just be honest. I don't get the attraction, but women love this guy and women vote. So, in spite of the sexual harassment claims, I don't know. It's a fascinating thing to think about in terms of what the voting bloc is going to do regarding an Andrew Cuomo.
I think that candidates who are appealing, their personality, they're physically handsome or pretty or that kind of thing, that they enjoy an advantage that they don't even really deserve. It's just life. They like that, and
looks privilege.
They're liked.
Don't tell me about white privilege. I want looks privilege.
Right, I do think that when they are found to, in real life, be something much different than what they appear on television or speaking in front of audiences, I think people turn on them. And I think that we've seen that happen with people who got caught doing something that was really horrible, and their constituency turned on them.
Yeah. Well, look, the left versus the right getting a little spicy here. We're talking about turn on. Well, the cameras, they got turned on for congestion pricing, and Kathy Hochul says she's not turning them off. We're going to talk congestion pricing when we come back. He's Governor David Paterson on the left. I'm James Flippin on the right. It's the left versus the right on 77 WABC.
It's the left versus the right. From Studio 77, it's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
Welcome back to the left versus the right. I'm James Flippin on the right. He's former Governor David Paterson of New York on the left. And I just wanted to kind of quickly connect back to the last discussion that we had, Governor Paterson, because we were talking a lot about Mayor Adams' political future and Andrew Cuomo's, or I should be saying, Andrew Cuomo. Yes, Andrew Cuomo's political future. I got the Cuomo brothers confused in my head. Governor Hochul making this decision not to remove Adams from office, from a political perspective, from a purely political perspective, not legal or the right thing to do, morality, just the game of politics. Was that the right move?
From a political perspective, and here we're saying from a political
like the way Governor Cuomo needs to maintain her bona fides with her Democratic donors, with the Democrat voters, she's got re-election in 2026.
I would say that she won this round because while she didn't remove him, she gave very good reasons for why she wasn't going to remove him. And then she said, they're going to have a supervisor, babysitter or something come in. I don't think that's going to be something where the person's following the mayor around every day,
right?
That kind of thing. So I think she found a way out of it where had she removed him, I think she'd have gotten a lot of flack.
Yeah.
Because, you and I talked about this last week. Where's the evidence?
Right.
Where the incidents where someone's coming forward and saying that Governor Adams did something to them, something like that. So she found a way to dismiss that. But just because you never really know, she left herself some leeway by saying she wanted an inspector general to monitor the city's progress.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my amateur view, she definitely did kind of pull a good move here, because I, as a Republican who just kind of wants continued chaos for the Democrats, I was like, yeah, get him out, fire him. It'd be hilarious. You know what I mean? You guys are burning it all down. But I think that she did kind of find a way to sashay her way past it. And what a crazy week for Hochul when you think about it. Not only just this whole Adams and the meeting deciding his fate and everybody coming together, the Congress people, the Al Sharptons of the world. And then she also finds out that congestion pricing is going away, and Trump says, long live the king. And it was just a crazy moment. But I think that the congestion pricing thing is a really fascinating debate in terms of like federalism to an extent, right? Like, I don't like congestion pricing. I think that the MTA is a complete disgrace and just an absolute, mismanaged agency that needs to be overhauled. But it's still a state agency. There's in essence, there was a decision made to tax motorists, even though they have absolutely nothing to do with the subway. And then the federal government kind of comes in and says, no. As a federalist, I do kind of almost get bent out of shape a little bit about that. So I don't really know exactly how to feel. Obviously, I'm very pleased that Donald Trump is doing more for the state of New York than the actual governor, but I'm curious your take on the situation.
That's really fascinating, the issue of to what extent can the federal government interfere in a state matter.
Right. And I guess it's got something to do with the highway administration or, because there's obviously federal highways that do
right,
run
because
through
the
it.
Federal Highway Administration was needed here. There's an environmental view that got thrown out yesterday with everything else. Mm-hmm. So the question that you raised that I frankly do not know the answer to
well, it's a little bit theoretical,
is
right?
whether or not the federal government even has a right. And here we're not battling politically.
And there is a lawsuit up to try to decide
exactly
that.
to figure out constitutionally that's right, which is right. And I think you've raised a great point.
So congestion pricing.
I never gave something to the right.
No, and I think that the whole concept of almost any tax being a bad tax is probably something that's definitely sort of the right, but it's also kind of libertarian in a way. And that's where we do sometimes find the middle here, because the various political parties don't necessarily always match up perfectly with political theory. And actually, this is, in terms of the stuff I wanted to talk about today, a perfect segue into the other thing I had, because for the longest time, Governor Paterson, when I was growing up, it was the Democrats who were super anti-war, and it was the Republicans who were the hawks, and the ones, when I was in high school going into Iraq and talking weapons of mass destruction and the neocon and all this kind of stuff. Now it feels like everything's flipped. So I was wondering where you are right now with the Russia-Ukraine situation. President Trump clearly is trying to carry forward his plan to try to find a ceasefire agreement, push for peace, speaking to Putin, speaking to Zelensky, sort of, especially through various envoys. And there's this back and forth between Zelensky and Trump that's kind of getting a little ugly, but it's all part of the negotiation, I think. So where are you at right now with Russia-Ukraine?
I think President Trump wants the premier, Putin, to know that he is not trying to screw him here. So I think the more he beats up on Zelensky, the more his reputation is hallowed in the Kremlin. Mm-hmm. Now, to what extent Putin is going to accept that, we'll have to wait and see. But while normally, when he said this guy's a dictator without being elected, he doesn't know what he's doing, we couldn't find him half the time, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's him going overboard. But I think the basic message is that the Ukraine is going to lose some property. They're going to lose some prestige, but it's the only way to save them.
It's a practical way of looking at it, right? I mean, frankly, it's kind of sort of refreshing to me as someone who feels as though it's really hard to know the reality through the fog of war in a foreign land, in a continent, and in a region I've never been, probably never will be. There's cultural differences. You get into that eastern portion of Ukraine. There's a lot of Russian-speaking territory there. Ukraine itself is a former Soviet state or territory or whatever the term was for them. So it is very complicated. And I think just this notion of someone as powerful and as influential as Trump coming forward and making it clear and laying out the ground rules that each side is going to have to deal with a little bit of something they don't necessarily want so much. I admittedly don't know in this scenario kind of what it is that Ukraine or what it is that Russia's giving up. Maybe you can speak to that. I don't know, because I know that Ukraine more or less is going to have to accept no NATO membership going forward. The Donbas region is going to have to basically be Russia. Deep earth rare minerals deal that the Trump administration is pushing for with Ukraine and that they might have to give up more or less like 50% of their rights to that stuff going forward. That's also kind of a tough sell. But look, we're talking about the billions and billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars that were going into this conflict just to keep it from spilling over and completely being a Russian route. So I don't know that there's a lot of leg to stand on if you're Kyiv or Zelensky and their various representatives.
If you're Kyiv, you better understand that an extra pair of hands comes with a mouth. And that, whoever comes in to help you, they also have their own agenda. And President Trump plays these chess games very well.
He does. And I think that's what's been kind of heartening to me and kind of hopeful, because I have to admit, I was at a party, I think it was last summer, like a family party, and I was speaking with a cousin of mine who I happen to know is a very conservative, very engaged political guy and a strong listener of 77 WABC, by the way. And I remember saying to him, I said, I just don't ever hear or read any headlines about peace negotiations. Ever. Like, I never, ever hear about at least some sort of phone call or a meeting in Qatar or a meeting in Saudi Arabia, or, that's one we had recently, just something that indicates maybe there's a kernel of hope. And it was really disheartening. And then this cousin more or less said, oh, what are you, siding with Putin and all this kind of. I said, no, I'm not even trying to get into the nitty gritty of it, man. I just want to hopefully see some level of push for peace. And I'm so heartened as a Christian, as someone who I think is more of a, let's put the guns and the bombs down and try to work it out. I know that's naive to think it could always happen that way, but it is encouraging to at least have this be such a focus here in the first month of the Trump presidency.
Now, Friday was the, third anniversary of the conflict?
I think it was exactly third, because there was that UN resolution, and this is exactly what we're talking about. The UN resolution that they wanted the U.S. to sign off on basically demanded that Moscow remove its troops, demanded that, Ukraine have this sovereignty doctrine. In essence, more of the same, right? Like more of the same, or just loggerheads and no one's giving an inch. And this isn't going to, which is bizarre to me, that I always thought of the United Nations as a peace-oriented organization that's trying to achieve that harmony. But in essence, they're saying, no, we're going to maintain this hardline position regarding Ukraine. And the U.S. has so far refused to sign it.
Well, the UN was founded on basically the platitude that when these situations happen, we could all come down to the UN, have a cup of coffee and work this out. But I think the countries, and I'm not even blaming them, but their own self-interest and their own issues gets in the way of that kind of cooperation. Yeah.
And look, as someone who is not a huge fan of the UN and definitely does not consider myself a globalist, but more of a nationalist, I think I understand why that is a very difficult. The best laid plans of mice and men, right? I mean, it's a good idea. Woodrow Wilson had it first with the League of Nations, and that didn't work out either. But, hey, they got a lot of very valuable real estate over there on the east side of Manhattan, so good for them. All right, so shifting gears a little bit, Governor Paterson, and he's David Paterson of the left. I'm James Flippin of the right, here on the left versus the right. Kash Patel confirmed as FBI director. There have been some Democrats, prominent ones, who expressed their concern because, in essence, I don't think there's any denying that Kash Patel, I'm going to try to think about the right way to say this. Kash Patel, I don't think you can use the term revenge tour, but he is definitely strongly focused on reform within the FBI and changing some elements and aspects of the way the federal police force has carried themselves. So as the Democrat in the discussion, what are your thoughts on Kash Patel's confirmation and just the state of the FBI and where that could take it?
Well, he was the one nominee that I thought all along was in big trouble.
Okay.
I didn't think...
You didn't think he had the votes, per se?
Robert F. Kennedy, I thought he'd go through.
Okay.
And the rest of them, I was pretty sure that they
Tulsi
would go
Gabbard,
through.
you thought she'd get through.
And
Hegseth.
And the reason that I felt this way wasn't of my own making. It was what I heard Republicans, strong supporters of President Trump, saying, he'll regret that he did this, that kind of thing. So I don't know what the history is of his past acts and what he's actually done. But I think, by this time, let's say next year, we'll know whether it was a good appointment or not. And when I say a good appointment, it means that nothing crazed or unforeseen would happen under his jurisdiction.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's something, everything right now just seems so reversed from the way it normally is. We talked about this a little bit earlier with like the war and the approach to peace and war and the merits of fighting and the way it used to be the Democrats felt the one way and the Republicans. It's such a weird thing with the FBI and like local police. And this is something that when Anthony Weiner was doing the show with me, I would talk about this all the time. And he would kind of give me the business about this. Conservatives, Republicans, we back the blue, right? We're strong and big supporters of the local police force. And the idea that the average cop is a racist kind of moron who's power hungry and just wants to beat people up with their nightstick, we reject that. But there's this idea from the left that there's too much of that pervasive culture in policing. With the FBI, which is just the federal police force, Democrats are kind of all about them these days and saying, no, they're doing the Lord's work and investigating corrupt politicians. And people on the right are saying, we don't like those guys because they've got a special thing that's driving them to protect the deep state. And how do we get past all this? Because clearly I think the prevailing mindset or the common sense thing would be that no matter if it's a local cop or a federal agent, there's bad ones and there's good ones. I know that's overly simplifying it, but like, how do we get back to that point of just saying, look, it's got to be, how do we get back to these people controlling the mission statement are the ones that we need to look at more closely?
Well, I think that over the years, particularly in New York City, the public's confidence in the police has increased. I think the department has done a number of things to make themselves a little more approachable.
What are some of those things you think the NYPD's done well in that respect?
Well, they've had patrols in bad neighborhoods that in the past they knew they were bad neighborhoods, so they thought the best way to deal with it was to surround them. And there was a time when too many police officers were acting completely on their own, knowing that they weren't going to get in any trouble for it.
Yeah, there was just no accountability.
And I'll cite an incident that occurred in 1942 when my father was coming from baseball practice and he had a baseball mitt. He comes off the subway to 116th Street and Lenox Avenue, and the cop says to him, "Where did you get that mitt?" And he said, "I bought it from the store." He says, "No, I think you stole it." And he hit him in the head with a nightstick. My father did 2 weeks in the hospital.
Wow.
And the NAACP came to see his family and said, "We want to bring charges." And he said, and my father's father, now my grandfather, said, "No, because if we bring charges, who's going to protect him when he goes out in the street again?" So there were incidents like that really did happen. But that kind of reaction, I can't remember like the last time I heard a story close to that one.
Well, I mean, look, there's clearly a need for checks on power. There's a need for transparency. There's a need for accountability. And that's true of both the FBI and any local police force. And anytime you have somebody who has a badge, carries a gun, it's a precarious thing in this society that we have, because we rely on those people to hold that to the utmost level of responsibility and respect.
Yeah,
and
I think that the interaction with the public, I'll be walking down the street, there are two officers standing on the corner. I say hello to them. When I was a teenager, because of the history that I knew, I was afraid of them. Even though they didn't do anything to upset me.
Yeah, and that's totally understandable, especially given the story that you tell. No question about it. All right, look, it's the left versus the right. He's former Governor David Paterson. I'm James Flippin. When we come back, I want to do a quick discussion here. It is Black History Month, but the Trump White House has kind of made it clear, trying to push back against some of this DEI agenda. At the same time, had a celebration of Black History Month this week at the White House. We're going to get into that here on the left versus the right.
It's the left versus the right. It's a 77 WABC debate. 77 WABC.
It's the left versus the right. I'm James Flippin. On the right, he's former Governor David Paterson. On the left, and you hear Governor Paterson on Katz and Cosby. James Flippin here doing some fill-in hosting duties and also doing the newscasts throughout the bulk of the week. So we just had the White House celebration this past Thursday in honor of Black History Month. And some in the news have sort of expressed confusion or maybe snark, if you will, saying that, oh, I thought the Trump White House was getting rid of DEI. And what's this? The identity-based Black History Month celebration. So just quickly, Governor Paterson, if I could ask your opinion on this. Celebrating Black History Month, is that important?
I think it's important the same way celebrating Independence Day is important. Celebrating Memorial Day is important. I think they are periods of history in America where things were changed. When we declared our independence in 1776, that was considered to be treason because we were still under the British government.
Sure.
So we had to fight for our independence.
Right.
When they, wrote the original Constitution, they basically described the black people as 3/5 of a man, not even 3/5 of a woman. But that got changed, thanks to the Emancipation Proclamation. So I think that we're a country that started out with a whole lot of drama that we probably didn't need, but Americans cleaved together and changed those situations. And so now when you have a Black History Month celebration, it's really not just Black history, it's American history.
Yeah.
Because it was American history when Dr. Martin Luther King spoke at the March on Washington. Yeah. And he talked about all Americans, not just blacks. And so I think that, I'm always ready for a party.
Yeah, exactly. Right. We don't need much of a reason, Governor Paterson. That's well said. And look, anytime, and as someone who earlier this week had a chance to go down there to the White House complex and experience all that for the first time, you don't have to give me much of a reason to go to any party down there in the nation's capital. But yeah, I think it's well said in the sense that I feel like part of my overarching feeling about race and identity politic, whether it's also aspects of sexuality or the country that your family came from or men and women. And I feel like it's largely a dividing thing and something that kind of creates artificial roadblocks in the relationships that humans have and the way people interact based off just liking or disliking the way someone is, and that being kind of the driving thing. But I'm also a student of history, and I feel strongly in the need to tell American history. And for example, I find it kind of heartbreaking and fascinating that we don't really teach and open up to the young students of America all the aspects of the Civil War. And of course, that leads into the civil rights movement 100 years later. And all of that outcropping of the 60s, we're still kind of dealing with that now because some of this DEI and going woke and going crazy is taking that 60s movement and just never stopping. Like it's almost like a cancer that never couldn't possibly stop itself because we had the 60s, but then all that energy and all that focus and all that cottage industry needs to go somewhere. So it continues to push it out further and further and further. So I'm a little bit conflicted on the concept of all of those. Like, for example, as myself, being a gay man, I think the whole Pride Month is almost a little too much. It's like, okay, have the parade, celebrate the fact that marriage equality was achieved and let's move on, but but I do think that you're making a good point in the sense that it's all history. It's all American history, and that's something that's obviously worth celebrating.
Very well said.
So one thing that we have not really spent a lot of time talking about is all this stuff that's going on with Doge and the IRS workers that are getting laid off. And here in New York City, there was some concern that maybe the 9/11 health and recovery fund was going to have to face cuts. The Trump White House made it clear, no, that's not going to happen. We're going to make sure that doesn't happen. How do you think this is going so far with this push for government efficiency and cutting back on spending?
So, James, I know you would concede that even though I'm left-leaning, I don't come in here and bash Trump all day.
No, you do not.
But I'll do it now.
Okay.
I think this is a shipwreck waiting to happen. And I don't understand what Bill Clinton actually accomplished the same goal. He didn't do it that quickly, but he had some studies conducted for him. They came back. They told him the areas where they thought they had too many employees.
You're talking about the RIGO thing, I think they called it.
Exactly, the RIGO. And I think that they were on the right track, but they were on the wrong train in that there was no reason to be these widespread layoffs. And I'm going to tell you, widespread layoffs and the anger that it's insinuating is coming from both sides of the aisle. And even the poor congressman down in Georgia, I can't think of his name, but he had a town meeting Thursday night. He was getting booed. He's a Republican. And he was saying, this will all work. They didn't want to hear it. Their family members are getting laid off. I really think there's a need for some reconsideration here because I think, first of all, in this rush to get all these people out, they may be getting some people out who they really need. And secondly, if they want to get a lot of people out, where's the training for the people who are going to take their place?
Well, it's a good point, I think, in the sense that you definitely do sometimes throw out the baby with the bathwater. And anytime you're looking to make big, broad cuts or paint with broad strokes, it's a little messy, right? And it's a little bit less than efficient, as funny as it is to use that word, given that we're talking about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. But I feel as though the argument from the right would probably be, we're so deep into the muck right now with a $38 trillion deficit, a third of our GDP basically going towards covering our mortgage, for lack of a better term, and the prospect of outright bankruptcy and just like tanking the value of the U.S. dollar is something that seems really kind of scary and in the offing right now. So I don't know that just cutting the spending is going to do enough because that's a big hill to climb, $38 trillion. And even if you're talking about overcoming like maybe a third of it or something like that to shore up our structure a little bit more, it's a lot to ask. But I do feel as though there's a desperation thing. Like there's kind of an alarm going off in the back room concerning the size of that deficit, concerning the inability to keep up with debt payments as you go further and further into the future. And it just feels like something that requires drastic steps, even if the size of government and even if there's pain. In other words, I don't know what the most recent jobless numbers were from the private sector, but I'm sure if you had a chance for those people to come together and yell at somebody at their company and say, hey, why is this happening? That would probably happen at that town meeting too.
It would. But I do think that this is the federal government. The more you plan, the less you have to react. And if they had planned this out, I don't think they'd be getting the pushback that they're getting right now.
So you're actually saying maybe it would have been better for this to for the layoffs to have started happening like 6 months from now or something like that.
Something like that.
Okay.
And I'm not saying 5 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it just needed to be better organized, and
the optics, the message, maybe the sort of like what you feel is a almost callousness behind it.
It certainly looks that way. I don't know that they really mean it. They're trying to fix things. But even, in DOGE, counting up all of the money that they saved, they accidentally confused $8 million with $8 billion. They had to go back and do the whole thing over. That's because you're rushing too quickly. It's a mistake. It's okay. It can be fixed. But you can't factor $8 billion into savings that really wasn't there.
Yeah, and I'll ask you about this as well, because this is something that in the previous hour I discussed with Paul Stone in terms of this idea of a DOGE dividend or the DOGE refund, I think it would be properly said,
right,
in terms of the money or the savings that they think they're going to. Do you like that idea? See, I can't get behind that. That's inflationary spending.
I like the idea for one particular reason. All four of the major polls after President Trump's first month have him down. 4 points from Gallup, 5 points from the Washington Post, and the other two I don't really remember. And the sending money back to the public would be the perfect thing to do, because these people were not upset at the way President Trump is dealing with Putin or the Ukraine. These people are not upset with what Trump has had to say about congestion pricing. Mm-hmm. They're upset because they feel that the economy is not being addressed. So that idea from Doge could really bail them out right now.
It could, but at the same time, it just feels like a cheap political high. You know what I mean? It feels like a sugar rush. Like, here's $5,000. You know what I mean? Please like us. And I don't know. I mean, Trump doesn't have to face the ballot
James,
box again.
When they come busting into the studio, I'm going to tell them you said it. I didn't say that.
Trust me, Governor Paterson. I'm getting it on X. I'm getting it on Twitter, because I said, I'm not so sure about this. Let's pay down the deficit. The future value of the dollar will thank you. And people say, I'd like that $5,000, James. Why don't you shut up your fat mouth? You know?
You're a brave man.
All right. So one thing I wanted to ask you is kind of this concept. Let's go a little off the beaten path. This is going to be left versus right, goes to outer space, because the International Space Station, Elon Musk, we're talking a lot about Doge. Elon Musk has pushed for the International Space Station to be taken out of commission sooner, because I think it's by 2030 that it's supposed to be decommissioned. But there's some stickiness there because Russia's heavily involved in the ISS, and Musk would like to see it going back to the Mars focus for NASA and spatial exploration. Do you agree with that?
That's interesting. Well, I went to the Hayden Planetarium when I was 9 years old, and even with my limited vision, I saw just a show about the planets and outer space and space travel, and I've been hooked ever since. I really like that we're challenging the same way our ancestors did the obstacles and trying to go into space, and that there are actually some ways we can make life here on this planet better by going into space, and the materials there that could be of help.
I love it. I love it.
Into it.
Let's name one of those initial craft that take the trip out to Mars in honor of Governor David Paterson. I'm all for it. And then last thing, buying or selling the Knicks getting a ring come springtime.
Selling.
Yeah, it's the Knicks. Come on. What do you expect from us? It's the left versus the right. I'm James Flippin. He's former Governor David Paterson. And stay tuned, because the tunes are coming your way next. Some music with Vinny Medugno.
Roger Stone here with an urgent warning. While we celebrate Trump's historic win, inflation continues to drain your IRA and 401k. And China is now targeting your money with a kill shot on the U.S. dollar. That's why thousands of Americans are shielding their savings with gold and contacting the experts at Colonial Metals Group. Gold has protected American wealth through every financial war. For a free 2024 gold guide that explains everything, go to freegoldguide.com/stone or call 800-747-6589. So go to freegoldguide.com/stone or call 800-747-6589. That's 800-747-6589 for a free 2024 gold guide to learn how you can protect your life's work, and if you qualify for a free home safe and up to $7,500 in free silver right now. That's freegoldguide.com/stone.